those 5 years that you had to live here. There were no roads that came here, and there were no trains that came here yet. I've got the railroad here, like the 1880s to St. Pete. You had to come by boat, and the soil was sandy, and you couldn't really grow vegetables, and there's no Publix you could go to, and so you had to fish for your food, and there was a threat of warfare with the Seminoles, and so it was not an easiest place to scratch out a living. The people that came here from the Armed Occupation Act were mostly fishermen who already lived here, who homesteaded the land, Cubans coming to America, and criminals escaping their past. So that's who kind of came out here. Over by the Skyway Bridge, you had a Cuban, Antonio Maximo Hernandez. He came to run a fishery. We call his homestead Maximo Park in St. Pete. Up in North Tampa Bay, you had Frenchman Philippe O'Day. We call him Odette Philippi. He wanted to grow some grapefruits, but we call his homestead Philippi Park. And at Jungle Prada, we had turtle farmer John Levesque. John Levesque, that's my St. Petersburg, Florida fisherman's palmetto shack. That's what I think John Levesque really looks like. This is the popular culture view of John Levesque, I would say. So there's kind of a difference there. But there is a legend that John Levesque was a pirate. Let's see. I will say that when the government comes poking around in Armed Occupation Act Florida and wants to know what John is doing for money out here, he certainly would not have told them I'm a pirate. John was a fisherman officially, and specifically he specialized in turtles. He was a turtler, according to Mr. Fuller's book, raising sea turtles at 2 turtle fisheries, one here by Jungle Prada and one by Pass Grill, and selling them for turtle soup. And that was John's business. So I think John probably looked a little more like this in his lifestyle than this. But this is kind of the popular view of John Levesque. John homesteaded the land where Jungle Prada is. I understand everything from about 9th Avenue North to the Jungle Prada building was part of John's homestead. But he was the one living there when we had the worst hurricane ever to hit this area in written history. And I will always knock on wood wherever I am when I say that phrase. But the worst hurricane to ever hit this area in written history was called the Great Gale of 1848. This is just a little kind of posthumous fact sheet. This is probably a Category 4 hurricane. 15 feet storm surge in downtown Tampa. Imagine that. They said the Gulf met the bay over Pinellas Park. Although Seminole, I think y'all are on some high ground here, so he probably would have been okay. And John's Pass cut. Before that hurricane, Treasure Island connected to Madeira Beach and actually continued unbroken all the way to Sand Key Park in Clearwater, and near Clearwater, and the whole island was called Sand Key. But the hurricane came through and busted out a chunk of it right in the top left of that map. And our turtle farmer, John Levesque, was the first person to sail through that missing chunk. And so his neighbor, a man named Joe Silva, started calling it John's Pass, and the name stuck and has been called John's Pass ever since. By the way, I'll throw this on there too. This is the pirate statue at the park in Treasure Island, and they call him Bucky, but I think that's supposed to be John Levesque, like the cartoon version of John Levesque. His name is Bucky officially. And this is the seal of Treasure Island. So they've really kind of taken the pirate thing to heart, you know. And that actually started kind of an interesting way. I was mentioned that when that storm came and broke off that southern tip of Sand Key, it was purchased by the Gulf Beach Resort Company, who started a hotel called the Coney Island Hotel and named the island Coney Island. The president of the Coney Island Hotel was a Mr. A.B. Archibald. There's an Archibald Beach over there. And I'm not sure if he was the one responsible for this or not, but they heard the legend that John Levesque was a pirate and lost gold in the hurricane. So they buried a treasure chest on the island, had some of the hotel guests dig it up, told everybody it was John Levesque's treasure, had a parade along Central Avenue all the way to downtown, showed the gold to people in the parade, sent press releases to the newspapers, treasure found on the beach in Florida. It turned out to be a fake, and it was lead-painted gold they were showing in the parade. But my line I use on my tour is that the treasure was fake, but the marketing was real. And in 1921, they renamed the island Treasure Island. It's been called Treasure Island for 102 years. So before that, it was Coney Island. Before that, it was Sand Key. Anyway, John Levesque, our historic figure for whom John's Pass is named, homesteaded that land, which is now the Jungle Prada site, and actually built a cabin there. And my grandfather liked to say he knew where the foundation of the old cabin was, where the gold might really be buried. But John Levesque's homestead was on that coast, right across from John's Pass. And the last big part of the history I want to touch on is the more modern history, which really was started by this man. That's Walter P. Fuller, and you probably heard of Walter Fuller Park nearby. Walter P. Fuller, Walter Pliny Fuller, was the son in a father-son development team. Walter P. Fuller and his dad, H. Walter Fuller. And they were developers. H. Walter had bought the Paso Grill Hotel in 1914. They ran steamboats. They take you from the Gulfport Casino to Paso Grill in a Fuller steamboat. They owned streetcars. They bought the trolley from the F.A. Davis Company, the license to run the trolley. When F.A. Davis retired, he's the guy that brought the trolley to Gulfport. The Fullers took over the trolley. And in 1908, the Fullers purchased 3,000 acres in a part of St. Pete known for having very few people and so many big trees that the locals called it the jungle. And it includes where our site is located. It's the jungle part. Oh, I want a little bit. That's the Paso Grill Hotel, by the way. And what else did I skip? Okay, so they bought their 3,000 acres, and the first thing they built was a streetcar. There was a streetcar that went to the Gulfport Casino, and they extended it along what is now Central Avenue, all the way to Boca Ciega Bay. This is like a postcard. I've got like my postcard version of the streetcar that says "Seen in the Jungle at the Vista," showing car arriving from St. Petersburg. The Vista is now part of South Pasadena. I believe that's kind of synonymous with South Pasadena today. But that's the postcard version of the jungle, and this is a real picture too. So that's kind of the real vehicle, which in this picture is called the JD, or the Jungle de Vista line. Started downtown by the pier in St. Pete, went 7 miles along what's now Central Avenue. When it got to the end of Central Avenue, today you drive over the Treasure Island Causeway. That bridge was built around 1940, so that wasn't there yet. The 1913 trolley veered to the right, followed the coast north along what's now Park Street North, and where the trolley turned, the first business opened. It was a hotel in 1916 called the Sunset Hotel. The Sunset Hotel is still there. It's the one called the Crystal Bay. The Crystal Bay used to be called the Sunset Hotel. But the Fullers didn't actually own the Sunset Hotel. I understand they had leased out the land to the person who built the Sunset, and they were never the operators of that. The Fullers' plan for the area was a golf resort. And by the way, this is just another Mr. Fuller, kind of younger Mr. Fuller, who was known as like a boy genius, Walter Fuller was. So they hired this guy. That's A.W. Tillinghast. And A.W. Tillinghast was one of the most prolific golf course designers in the country. I just read the other night, like 265 courses he made. Some of the ones I recognize, I'm not a golfer, but Bethpage Black and a couple other interesting names that I recognize from golf course notoriety. But that's A.W. Tillinghast. He built a championship golf course in the jungle. And the Fullers opened a luxury hotel, a country club, called the Jungle Hotel and Country Club. That's also still there, but it's called the Admiral Farragut Academy today. That's the Jungle Hotel. So that's the kind of sketch here. Here's the Admiral Farragut Academy today, and here's the Jungle Hotel and Golf Course, which was built in 1925. To give the guests who stayed there places to shop and eat and buy clothes and souvenirs and take a boat to the beach, the Fullers extended the trolley along what's now Park Street all the way to Elbow Lane. Elbow Lane is where the trolley turned around. And there they built the Jungle Prado, actually, Prado. I say Jungle Prado, by the way, and it's on the name Jungle Prado site, because that's how everybody knows it. It's on the National Register of Historic Places as the Jungle Prado site. It's in the phone book as Jungle Prado or the Jungle Prado Tavern. It was supposed to be Jungle Prado. And if you look it up and Google Translate Spanish to English, Prado means field or meadow in Spanish, and it was the Jungle Meadow. The best I can tell, it is pure local corruption in the 40s, the term Prado into Prada, but Mr. Fuller always calls it my Prado building. But that's a battle that I'm just not fighting, so I just mentioned that when I saw it there. But yeah, originally a shopping mall. There were 11 small stores. There was an auto garage, a clothing store, a drugstore, a restaurant, a bait shop, and a fishing pier. And this is another picture, an actual picture of the Jungle Prada. Again, according to Mr. Fuller, built in 1925. This was St. Pete's first strip mall, first modern strip mall in Pinellas County, actually. But at the end of the building, closest to the water, there was a nightclub that became a speakeasy during Prohibition called the Gangplank. And this is a colorized postcard of the Gangplank at Jungle Prada. In the background of this picture, you can see one of the ship's prows in the background kind of sticking out. So that's one of the ship's prows. Those are still there. So keep an eye on that ship's prow and the door, the interesting doorway, because because this is a picture from like 2 years ago out there, and you can see it's the same doorway. You got your ship's prows. It's apartments now, so it's actually not a nightclub anymore. But the old ads say, dine and dance in Spanish galleons on the shore of Boca Ciega Bay. I understand the interior is supposed to be like the interior of a Spanish galleon, so it was a gangplank. And there's Mr. and Mrs. Walter P. Fuller right there. They were the socialites who hosted events at the gangplank. Walter Fuller once said, the only bootlegger I ever met was me. I was the one selling alcohol out there. He told the story in his book, St. Petersburg and Its People, which is for free online. You can read it for free. USF uploaded it. You can read his book. He tells the story of how he got the liquor. He said, I'm building Jungle Prada and the Jungle Hotel and the golf course out there. And there are salespeople. And one man basically says to me, Mr. Fuller, I have your palm trees down on my boat. Come get your palm trees. Mr. Fuller doesn't remember ordering palm trees. He doesn't know who this guy is, but he goes down to the water because he's getting lots of deliveries. And under the palms on this person's boat is 100 cases of illegal liquor during Prohibition. Mr. Fuller said he bought the whole thing on the spot, the boat, the booze, and the trees. That was kind of his funny line about the boat, the booze, and the trees. Didn't really know who the guy was, didn't really care, but stored the alcohol to make it home, and at night would push it in a wheelbarrow over to the Jungle Prada, and they would sell it at the club. And that brought famous people to the area in more recent times. If you are someone who grew up around here, you certainly heard stories of Babe Ruth and Al Capone and their involvement in our community at large, but they both have kind of connections to the Jungle Prada site as well. As far as Al Capone goes, for my history tour, I really wanted to prove that he was there in the building. And I looked pretty hard for pictures of Al Capone at the building, and I couldn't find any actual pictures of him. The closest I've come to actual evidence is what I call circumstantial evidence. There's a hotel register from the Jungle Hotel with 20 known Al Capone associates on the guest list. They ran up a $5,000 bill in 2 weeks back in the 20s. That's like $60,000, something in today's money. Someone figured out for me. The signature on the bill is a man named Johnny Torrio. He was a bootlegger. Walter Fuller said in his book that Torrio and his guys were the classiest, nicest people you could possibly meet, and they were very well behaved the whole time they were there. When they left the building, they got out all at the same time and walked into waiting cars with the doors open, and they pulled away, and the last guy out the door signed the bill, Johnny Torrio, and they got a cashier's check in the mail for the $5,000 from Atlanta. So he said his friends were there, but Mr. Fuller denied that Al Capone was ever in the building. But Al Capone did own 1/3 of a company called the Mangrove Company, which was buying land in Pinellas County, and there was also liquor showing up at the same time. And so with Al Capone's buddies up the road and him owning land and liquor at the club, he might have had a hand in this. When I looked up Babe Ruth, I had an easier time finding proof. This headline says, Golf lures Babe Ruth to Jungle Course. The New York Yankees do their spring training today in Tampa, but from 1925 until 1961, they were in St. Petersburg. Babe Ruth played over 100 rounds of golf at the Jungle Golf Course, called it my favorite golf course in Florida, and had 3 birthday parties at the Jungle Hotel. And there's a picture of Babe Ruth getting his birthday cake at the Jungle Hotel. And there's him with Al Lang and Miller Huggins sitting on a green roller at the Jungle Country Club golf course, a green roller. Oh, and one more of Babe Ruth as well. I've got him, I think, teaching, I'm not sure if that's his second wife, Claire, or not, but he's teaching some young lady how to golf, it looks like, in front of the Jungle Prada building right there. Unfortunately for the owner, Mr. Fuller, his goal of making the Jungle Prada a celebrity golf resort did not ever come to full fruition. It had a pretty good start back in the 1920s, but when the 20s ended, so did the land boom, and when the 30s came, so did the Great Depression. And Mr. Fuller characterizes the land boom of the 20s as mostly speculative in that area. People were buying big old chunks of real estate, building a model house, and trying to sell the lots. And so when the boom went bust, there were model houses and empty lots, but no neighborhoods to speak of in the jungle. Most of the neighborhoods in Jungle Prada were built in the 1950s, most of those neighborhoods. The Fullers held on for years, trying to make a go of their golf resort, but eventually, in fact, they even ran I believe the first radio station in Pinellas County out of the Jungle Hotel during the 30s, one of the first, if not the first. But eventually, they sold their properties. They turned their hotel over to the military during World War II, and the troops were using it for training during the war. And after the war, it was sold to a New Jersey-based military school called the Admiral Farragut Academy, so that's what's there today. The Jungle Prada building was sold and remodeled into a hotel called the Jungle Prada Inn. So they took the shops and turned them into hotel rooms, and now they're apartments. But the restaurant has been right there where the restaurant is the whole time, and I found a couple of pictures of the Jungle Prada as a hotel. But lucky for my family, the Fullers sold, when they were selling their land, 3 acres, a 3-acre lot just south of Jungle Prada in the year 1940 for $20,000 to these folks. And these are my grandparents, which is why this is like a family affair where I do my tours. And the couple there on the left is my grandfather and grandmother. It's Harold C. Anderson, that was my grandfather. Everybody called him Happy. He was born 1905 and died 1997. He was 92 years old when he passed away. He was born in Livingston Manor, New York, but grew up in St. Pete, Florida, and went to St. Pete High, went to high school in St. Pete. And in 1948, opened a family business, which is still in business, so I give them a plug every time I do a tour, and I'll do it here too. The Anderson Lumber Company on 49th Street, about 7th Avenue South, about between 6th and 7th by the bike trail, for all your exotic hardwood and custom milling. They have a really nice machine that's custom milling. Go see Cousin Fred, who runs the Anderson Lumber Company. But actually in my career, I took one after my grandmother. My grandmother Frances is seen there in a wheelchair. She had polio, and for most of her adult life, she was stuck in a wheelchair. But despite that physical setback, she raised 4 kids. They were 3 boys and a girl. My father is the third of 4 children. And she was also the switchboard operator and office manager for the Anderson Lumber Company, so she helped out with the business. In Walter Fuller's book, he mentions my grandparents a couple of times, and one line I like that he uses about my grandmother is he's talking about grandfather, and he says, talking about the business, and he is ably assisted by his valiant wife who operates from wheelchairs in the Walter Fuller book, so I thought that was pretty nice. But yeah, so like grandmother, I became a horticulturalist, and that's been my training for the last 6 or 10 years. I've worked with plants. My first job giving tours was at the Edison Ford Estates in Fort Myers, and I ended up being full-time in their garden. Then I came to the Sunken Gardens and the Florida Botanic Gardens, and I helped my father maintain the gardens at the Jungle Prada now. There's just a couple little things to wrap up. I think I'm done with my presentation mostly, but I got some wrap-up pictures. I was coming here from Jungle Prada today, and I turned left on this road. This is looking towards Bay Pines Boulevard along this is now Bay Pines Boulevard, looking left from Park Street. One of the bits of impetus for my grandfather actually buying the mound, he bought it for preservation mostly, was that I believe in 1938, one of the larger mounds along the coast of Bocaciega Bay was torn down to build the Lighthouse Inn, right on the corner of what's now Park Street and Bay Pines Boulevard. It's not the Lighthouse Plaza, so it's like the Glory Days sports bar and the Nosh Pit and the fast signs over there, but that was where one of the big Indian mounds was, and this is looking down Bay Pines Boulevard. I think I got the picture of the courthouse in St. Pete. I mentioned the original, the concrete sign is gone, but we had a great event in 2021 with a lot of illustrious guests here to kick off the new state historic marker. I think there's a few people probably who are here who are in this picture somewhere maybe, but I see Bob Austin and a few other folks. My parents are in there somewhere. So that is the ceremony to dedicate the new sign. And I probably got to stop myself here, but I took some pictures of some other little, where the other mounds are around Tampa Bay. So you got the Safety Harbor Mound at Philippi Park. I think about a third of that got washed away in the 1848 hurricane. So it used to be even bigger, but that was to see the power for the Tocobaga. This is from Maximo Park. There were mounds at Maximo. And this is not a mound, of course. That's palm tree roots. But how did all those shells get on those palm tree roots? I feel that was grown out of a shell mound, and someone cleared away around the palm tree and left a bunch of shells stuck in the roots. This is on Tierra Verde. People ask me about burial mounds all the time. Our site is not a burial mound. I'll talk about why. I think it was a ceremonial gathering place on the tour, but no human bones have been found there. There was a burial mound on Tierra Verde in 1959. They were building a resort called Guy Lombardo's Portugal and found a burial mound with 200 bodies on Tierra Verde. That's the sign that's left from it. And then poor Mound Park. Bayfront Hospital used to be called Mound Park. My grandfather bought the Jungle Prada mound to preserve it in 1940. This is from the Tampa Tribune in 1950. They just voted to tear down this mound at Mound Park Hospital. So that's why I call my grandfather a preservationist before it was cool. Nowadays, I think this is a room where you have a lot of people that if someone was going to tear down an important Native American site, someone would have something to say about it. But in 1940, it was kind of the Wild West, and if you wanted the mound gone, you could have it gone if you just kind of rubber stamped it. So grandfather bought the mount in this era to preserve the mound. So I think that's pretty cool. And then they say Indian burial mound. That's the pink streets. I always see that on Google Maps. I don't think it's a burial mound either, but someone can maybe correct me on that if they know better. And that's the old sign from the trolley. It's a little trolley route down Park Street. I'm going to go there right now. And this is the last slide on the presentation. Just an overview of Tampa Bay. Sometimes I show this show. It might be hard to get in the entrance if you're in Narvaez coming from the south. But I like to point at that map for lots of different points that I make on the tour. Anyway, it's almost coming up on 8 o'clock. And so I will say that's the end of my presentation. And if there are questions, yeah, Michelle's got her hand up back there.
Certainly, if people have questions, but I have one. You mentioned him a bit ago. He knew about the mounds at Lighthouse Inn or
Yeah.
Well, he passed away. What was his name?
Oh, Mac Perry?
Mac
Perry. Mac Perry, yeah.
Mac Perry. I think it was him who told me or told us in the museum at one time that where that golf and country club was, there was a airport there.
Oh, yeah.
There.
Piper
There
Fuller
was a
Airfield.
mall now.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure exactly where it was, but it's in that area. And something just really interesting I learned that I'll just share is that, so that was called Piper Fuller Airfield, and it was one part Walter Fuller and one part R.L. Piper. And why there's so much darn stuff there called Tyrone is not because there was some person named Tyrone, it's because R.L. Piper came from Tyrone, Pennsylvania. So there you go. Yeah.
What was Mac Perry's role in all this?
Mac Perry came, he was like he's, I think from Virginia before he came here, and he was a plant guy, and he came here to be the extension agent for the horticulture extension in Pinellas County. So he's a plant person. He met my parents, ended up purchasing a home on another Tocobaga mound along that same coast, up on like 42nd Avenue North, right inside of Bay Pines Boulevard. Mac Perry was just a Renaissance man, that's how I describe him usually. He was an author who ended up writing several books, including Indian Mounds You Can Visit and The Black Conquistador, and some really great historical.
We have those books here.
Yeah, those are great. In fact, I'll talk about that. He was in a band called the New World Celts, and they played at Dunedin and different like Irish festivals around, that's Scottish. That's a Scottish. Sorry, Scottish. Someone's gonna get mad if I make that mistake. So for sure. And he was a painter who painted a lot of cool scenes, including some of our property. Really, really good painter. And he also owned a pest control business. So I say Mac Perry, artist, author, musician, scholar, pest control expert, Mac Perry. But unfortunately, he passed away a couple years ago.
What can you tell us, David, about Chief Osceola?
I can't tell you a whole lot about Chief Osceola. I know a little bit about Osceola and the time he was in prison, incarcerated at the Castillo de San Marcos, and how he ended up kind of being tricked into surrendering himself. And so I know a little bit of the story, but I can't really enlighten you with anything you don't know probably.
Yeah, he's on our city, the Seminole City seal, right there.
Yeah.
And anyway, he's all dressed up in that picture there. He was a relentless leader of his people.
I do know that about him. Very respected leader, always painted in a respected light. I've been recently reading a lot about two people who fought with Osceola, John Horse and Wildcat, were in the Seminole Wars. Anyway, it's a really interesting story about that time, but I would feel a little bit on shaky ground telling you much more.
Thank you.
Roger.
Yeah, going back to your story about the Tocobaga,
Yeah.
and you were let's say uncertain whether it was the name of the tribe or the chief.
Yeah.
Well, there is a proof on Fontanita's translated diary. He was a 13-year-old slave of the Pulusa, but he knew all the language. He got to travel through this area, and he says that the name Tocobaga in their language meant the place of the gourds. So it was the name of the tribe. Now the chief probably maybe in
Took that
the
on.
book said, hey, went the chief Tocobaga, the chief of the Tobaga. So his name was not Tocobaga, but the tribe was Tocobaga, and it meant the place of the gourds.
Well, thank you for that, and yeah, very good. Thank you, Roger. Back here, didn't Philip, but yeah.
Would you define the Jungle Prada street outlines?
I've seen this on a map, part of the jungle. I've been to these Jungle Prada Neighborhood Association meetings. Now, it's different. There's Jungle Prada, there's Jungle Terrace, and there's like the jungle. I think the whole thing is the jungle. And once you get north of 22nd Avenue, you're in Jungle Terrace. and Jungle Terrace comes all the way to like Tyrone Bay Pines. I was talking to Randy Wayne White, the author who opened the Dock Fords here, and he wanted to call it the Jungle Terrace location. It had a little kerfuffle with the people from the neighborhood association that it's actually like 400 feet outside of Jungle Terrace. But then south of 22nd Avenue is Jungle Prada, and it goes, you know, in the direction of Azalea Park down 22nd Avenue, but not all the way. Probably Country Club is the end of Jungle Prada, but then it goes all the way down at least to the military school, heading south. At least maybe all the way to Central, but yeah. Philip, and then over here again.
The naming of most of their tribes, what the Spanish did in the journals and diaries and logs, they would use the term, usually, the tribe of. So it could have been either a location,
Yep.
or in some cases, the name of the chieftain who might have taken that name for the location. But like the unusual one is the Calusi, because when the Spanish down there, they describe that he's called
Carlos. Yeah, Carlos.
which is where the island gets its from and all those keys down there. But like I say, use the journal said the tribe of, which could be the chief itself or the location.
I'm glad you guys. I mean, I know Roger and Philip, and we can all learn a lot from these guys. Most people come on my tour called them the toboggans, and I kind of joked they weren't sledding around here. So I think I got some experts. I'm intermediate somewhere, but I'm helping some other people who don't know anything about it. But yeah, back there.
Wasn't Andrew Jackson involved in the Seminole War?
He was. Andrew Jackson was definitely involved in the first Seminole War. My impression, and again, I'm not an expert in this, but I will say that the Seminole were a thorn in the side of the Union during the War of 1812, and they were like raiding from Florida, and I think the British had convinced them that if they helped the British, they would help them, like, you know, get a favorable outcome after the war from the Americans. And so Andrew Jackson was big on putting a stop to having a hostile southern border, and he led an aggressive campaign into Florida, which kind of was kicking off the first Seminole War. And then they had settled on a ceasefire, and then happened again, so there were several episodes. Yeah.
Just give a little bit of history about the statue of Buckley on the
Oh yeah, please do.
story of Pasadena Avenue, the press car. That's the look like the covered wagon called Western Road. And it actually was a guy who fought on the village. Okay, it was after about there, and like Buckley in a hotel for
That's the one I heard about.
And after that, it went to Golf Golf.
Okay, that's good, like a mini golf course, yeah.
And originally, and then they said, well, we want to salvage that when they tore down the golf course, and that's when Fred Vinyl took over.
I had just read recently that it was part of like the Buccaneer Hotel, so you just add a lot more to that. But yeah, it's definitely this goes along with the whole theme of Treasure Island. But yeah, Bucky, yeah.
Back in the 70s, I was digging with Mac Perry back behind the restaurant. What were we digging for?
What were we digging? What were we doing back there? Well, let's see. There's a lot of artifacts that have been found there over the years. You know, I have this really book. I was trying to see if Roger had something to do with this, but this is like a little report on the archaeological dig at our site, and they found some really cool stuff. I think there's finds to be had all along that coast, and it's mostly just like, you know, evidence of the people's lives, their broken pottery, their discarded shells, their small bones from the animals they were eating. There have been a few more like dramatic finds. We have some Spanish beads in our little museum that I don't think came with Narvaez, but they came with probably Pedro Menendez a little bit later on, probably. And Walter Fuller, you know, he was a promoter and a storyteller, but I think he had an interest in keeping the facts mostly straight. I tend to believe Mr. Fuller, although I know he'd like to exaggerate some. He talks about finding a Spanish sword hilt in that area that was stolen. So he said there was a hilt of a Spanish sword that went missing one day. So that's could be a full or tall tale. But yeah, as far as what you're looking for back there, we have more pottery at our location than I. When I go to other well-preserved sites like Emerson Point Preserve in Palmetto, I see a lot of shells, but I never see pottery like our place.
Is that your land we were digging on?
Oh, if you're behind the restaurant, you're probably not. I don't know which behind you're talking about, but we are. If you were with Matt Perry, he probably could have been on our land. But I couldn't tell you for sure. I don't know which way of the restaurant you were. If you were north or south of it. South of it, we're south of it. North of it, you were probably somewhere else.
South.
Okay, yeah, we're south of it. There's the park, and then there's our. You're probably on our property, probably.
I apologize for stealing your stuff.
Well, Mac, if you're with Mac, you're probably okay. My parents have known Mac for a long time.
What are your museum hours?
Oh yeah, see, I should promote this. So yes, sometime in the future, I plan on establishing some time when there's like a open museum hours. The museum can be viewed at Sacred Lands events. So if you come for one of like the Sacred Lands events, like the music, you can usually see the museum. But I do my guided tour, and I've got flyers, which I'm going to put out someplace. Oh, there they are, flyers. I got flyers right here on the table for my tour, and business cards for Sacred Lands, who does the events, like the music and the meditations. I do my tours typically Wednesday through Sunday at 11:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. It's my small business. I charge $14 for adults and $6 for kids. It's a 75 to 90-minute tour. I've got a lot of pictures that I show. The museum's part of that. You can always see the museum when you come for the tour. Anytime you come to the property for an event, you can probably see the museum. You can look in there at the museum. And we have a lot of events. But because my parents still live at the site and we don't have like staff that's kind of keeping an eye on things, the gate is only open when there's an event, either a tour or a musical event, or maybe when Gypsy Wind comes, we'll have it open. Because I know I talked to Kristen, I didn't know she was part of that, but I know Gypsy Wind's come to our place many times. But yeah, so it's my little business. And my flyer will have a website and a phone number, and it will say to make reservations. That's because I am a single member LLC, so if I'm gonna take any time off ever, that I've gotta probably, close off the tour for a couple of weeks, or a week or so here and there, or a day or so here and there. So it's good to check the website. If it's on the calendar, if it's available, I'm doing the tour, and you can just show up, but I encourage reservations.
Unless anybody else has any other questions, I've got one last one. Revisit about the guy with the horse or cow face or something.
Oh, Cabeza de Vaca?
Yes.
Okay, I got the name. Okay, so I'm not going to go give the whole story. If you come on the Jungle Product Tour, if you take a flyer, come on the tour, I will go into great detail about the journey across the country. But I think what I'm going to do for Michelle is just tell you how he got that crazy name, Cabeza de Vaca. So his father, or not his father, but his couple generations back, they were the Alahas. The family was Alaha. And in fact, one of his ancestors is part of the Canary Island, takeover by Spain. During the Reconquista in the 13th century, when Christian kings of Spain Castile and Leon were recapturing Spanish territory from the Muslims, a Christian king of Leon was about to fight a big battle and was shown the location of a mountain pass by a farmer who indicated where to take this little turn by placing the skull of a cow by the opening to the pass. The king won the battle and came back to thank poor farmer Alaha by dubbing him Cabeza de Vaca, head of the cow, and it was an honorary title. Cabeza de Vaca is what I would call a hidalgo, which I talked about sometimes, and it literally is from the Spanish hijo de algo, which translates as son of something, and it's like your lesser nobility. So it's not your duke of whatever or your earl of something or other, but it's some person who has got some of the rights and privileges of the nobility, maybe without all the wealth that comes along with it, but it's like a little calling card for the family. So it sounds like a funky name, Cabeza de Vaca, but when the king came and made Mr. Alaha Cabeza de Vaca, that was like they had made it. They were made people, so they hung on to that one.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.